Yes.
And we're recording now. Hello there. I'm talking to Earl Silverman, who is the founder of currently the only men's shelter in Canada.
MASH 4077, Men's Alternative Safe House.
MASH 4077. And that is a reference to the TV show, or was that a coincidence?
It's just a coincidence. A friend of mine, she came up with, I asked for an acronym, and she came up with Men's Alternative Safe House, MASH. And then I happened to notice that my phone number was 4077, so I just combined it, hoping that people would take a look at it, give a giggle, and get their interest a little more.
So you just had a television appearance on the local Calgary station. How did that go? Did you think that you were given enough time to say your piece, or do you think they gave you cast you in a fair light? How do you think that went?
I felt that the interviewer, Brenda McFinley, did a pretty good job of interviewing me, of keeping the session on focus. It is a very difficult topic, especially for people who are unfamiliar with it in the media, because they don't know how to handle it very well. For years and years, they've only heard about female victims of domestic violence. This is something virtually brand new, even though the research has been around for many, many years.
Yeah, it's a very taboo thing in the media to talk about men's issues.
Yes, it is. And one of the things that I've encountered, and certainly one of the things that I find very interesting about the men's movement, call it the men's movement, but I would say 40 to 50% of the people that I come across are women. So, though it's a men's equality movement, there are both men and women who are working together on it. And in the men's movement, there isn't a distinction between men and women. Men and women are working together in a common direction. But the media, as well as the women's groups have promoted the concept that anything that is not supporting women is anti-woman. So for the media to speak about men's issues, people will consider it as an anti-woman effort, even though virtually every man and woman that I know who speaks about men's issues have no negative statements about women. Women are part of our lives. It's not like the movement that makes a lot of money in debasing men. Men just see women as friends, associates, lovers, partners, everything.
However, there is a minority of people that are attracted to the men's movement that may be truly angry with women. Like, what do you have to say about dealing with those type of people that have the wrong idea about the movement, that may kind of like see it as almost like a hate movement that they could join?
I have seen on various e-groups where people like you just described join in, and in a very short time they leave because they notice that they encounter the people who are on the group are not interested in listening to their garbage rhetoric. I don't want to hear anything anti-woman, and there's no need to. I mean, there's enough anger and that I don't have to go to my way to find it. So, in essence, and these are the very right-wing radical men who want to go back to the old style where men ruled the house and the women did the dishes. Very few, very far in between, And as I said, those who do join groups, they leave of their own accord because no one is interested in listening to their garbage.
And I know I asked you earlier before we started recording, but what did you think of that so-called legal expert they had on the show when...
You're talking about the lawyer from Legal Aid that represented the woman's side on the Alberta Primetime show?
That's right.
One of the things that I've encountered is that they will not enter into discussion with any men or men's organization. A part of the reason for that is for them to enter into a discussion they feel brings credibility to our position, and they do not even want to bring that type of credibility. The other part that I've seen over and over and over again, they really don't have any argument. They do not want to put someone against me on a discussion because they don't have any valid information. This fellow was a lawyer. He was able to go back to the fact that, well, according to the law, this is the way it is. So he had no idea what the statistics were. He had no idea anything about domestic violence other than from a perspective of legal aid lawyer. So that's why he was there. I mean, there's numerous women's groups and women's shelter in Edmonton. So certainly they could have put at least one person rather than a legal aid lawyer. But they were just protecting their butt because they knew that they would lose.
Yeah, it seemed kind of fishy. He just didn't seem very credible to me. He kind of seemed spaced out. And like I said, he had that funky hair. He just didn't seem like he was ready for a serious discussion about men's issues and women's issues. And
yeah, that's because he didn't have any information. It was not his topic of choice. He was just put into that position.
It was like, oh my God, why am I here?
Basically.
I want to go back to bed.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. So, do you think there's a deliberate propaganda trying to program men and women to be combative with each other?
Difficult question. Good question. Difficult question. Again, to be combative, they would, in order to be combative, they have to acknowledge that part of our argument may have credibility. So, as I said, they won't even go into any type of argument, either combative or non-combative, because they just don't want to give any credibility.
Well, the way I see it is, I think there was a deliberate attempt to break up the families and get men and women to despise each other, so that there is no what's the word, cohesion among the people, so that big government could ultimately take over.
Well, there's certainly a lot of perspectives on that. I'll sort of put it in an interesting nutshell. I've sort of looked at it this way. This is my version of A Tale of Two Cities. You have two cities. One city, both cities have 1 million people in it. But City A, they're all couples. So you only need 500,000 homes. City B, they're all singles. You need 1 million homes. So what you're looking at is, in one city, you only need one toothpaste shared between two people. In the other city, you need two different toothpastes. So everything is duplicated. Vehicles are duplicated. Electric bills are duplicated. Gas bills are duplicated. So the city that only has single people shows a better economic growth than a city with married people. So to answer your question, that's my sort of concept as to why the government is liking the separation of families, because it helps in the economic growth of the country. So single people are better for the gross national product of countries than married people.
And yet we're in a recession right now.
And we're in a recession.
Yeah.
And a recession means that there's more social workers, which are typically women's jobs, female jobs, and there's a lack of construction, which is men's jobs. So that just works fine in the agenda of supplying services and economic growth for women and nothing for men. It's tough being a guy.
So what do you have to say about Gloria Steinem's involvement with the CIA?
The first time I heard about that was actually from a buddy of mine who was involved in the conspiracy theorists, and I just took it as that. But then when I found out that the CIA did in fact pay her, it then went back to another interesting story of another conspiracy theorist that it was called Operation Paperclip. It was after the Second World War that when you take a look at United States space rockets, it would not have occurred if they did not have von Braun, who was a German missile scientist in Germany in World War II. In Operation Paperclip, what they did was they got a lot of the SS involved in the CIA to set up the CIA to be very similar to the SS because it was so efficient. How's that for an expanded conspiracy theory?
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not going to add to that because it I don't have an understanding of it. I mean, if the CIA paid for her and Ms. magazine to be created, I think they should speak to the fact before anyone else jumps to a conclusion.
I just find it interesting that they're against the patriarchy, and yet they're being funded by the patriarchy.
Well, that's where one of my theories are. The patriarchy funds the women organization to keep the rest of the men in place. I mean, patriarchy does not include all men. It typically just means the men in power. And certainly you and I are not men in power. We're not part of the patriarchy, but they fund women to repress men or suppress men. Women are oppressed, and they fund these women to suppress men so the men don't go against the patriarchy.
Interesting. So, what is your take on domestic violence and how men are treated?
Domestic violence, if it's seen as a social issue, it'll be seen as an issue with solutions. If it is seen as a gender issue, it'll seem to be combative, and a lot of blame is associated with it. So, in terms of the fact that, like you're looking at Canada has 593 women shelters, in excess of 14,000 funded beds, the majority of those employees are women. So the taxes which men pay the majority of are then turned around to support women's organizations.
How about the police themselves? How do you think the police view men when it comes to domestic violence?
They're trained. They have they have training, they have books, they have videos, and all the literature and education that they have points to women as the victims and men as the perpetrators. In Alberta, there's the Handbook on Domestic Violence for Police Officers and Crown Prosecutors, and it's like 200 pages. And in that 200 pages, there are incidences describing women as victim, men as perpetrator. There's not a single issue discussing men as victims, which is rather interesting because the Calgary police force started finding officers sleeping in their squad cars who could not go home due to domestic violence. So what they did was establish Diakonos House, which is online for anyone to see. And what it is a shelter for police officers. And it's been so effective in Calgary that they've established one in Edmonton and one in Red Deer. So though the police are educated to arrest the men, the police themselves find themselves in situations where they are the victims of domestic violence, and they have a shelter, whereas the average man does not.
Yeah, interesting. And they themselves find that they're getting arrested by their buddies now, huh?
Don't know. I have no information on that, so I can't jump to. But
It would seem logical, though, right? Because, if they have to arrest other men automatically on domestic violence, if there's a complaint against them, even though they're officers, still got to be arrested.
there have been some cases, but that I found in newspapers, but not all that much. So it's hard to speculate on something that I don't know for sure. But when we take a look at the domestic violence research, every single dual gender study that I've encountered demonstrates that it's 40 to 50% male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence. When we look at social issues, a social issue would be like homeless or suicide. We do not separate homeless into gender and say 80% of the homeless are men. We just look at homeless people as a social issue. When we take a look at military veterans, we do not separate it into male veterans and female veterans. We include both men and women because we acknowledge both men and women are veterans. When we talk about people who die on the job, even though 97% of the workers who die on work-related issues, job issues, are men, we still acknowledge that 3% of the victims who die at work are women. So we include both men and women in workers who die at the job. But when it comes to family violence, men are excluded.
And would it be okay to ask you about your personal experience with domestic violence?
My personal story, I don't talk about it all that much. Part of the reason is that that is my woundedness, and I try to stay away from it. What I'm trying to work on is finding solutions. And if I get involved in my story too much, I get away from the idea that we as people in the community, we have to work together and find solutions.
Now, have you heard of an organization called RadFem Hub?
No, I haven't.
It seems to be an extremist minority of the radical feminism, but it's like not just on the internet. They actually seem to be organizing. But since you know nothing about it, you don't have an opinion on it, so we'll just move on.
Okay. The one thing that I can speak to, and She's dead now, but her name is Andrea Dworkin, and the government of Alberta paid her to speak at a conference in Banff, and basically talk about radfem. Her philosophy was all men are rapists. Some just control it better than others.
Yeah, she's the one that basically said that all heterosexual sex is rape, even if it's
Rape.
consensual.
Yeah. Yes. 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 And a lot of people have taken on her philosophy, and I've seen her quotes numerous times. But basically, it's not on the basis of as much as it is her own fantasy. But here we have fantasy taken as fact. And I certainly see a lot of that happening in the women's organizations. They just take fantasy and push it as fact.
Yeah, I see that they're still inspired by Valerie Solanas, people like that.
Yes.
Yes. Have you seen in the legal system? Would it be fair to say that women are treated differently when it comes to sentencing?
I haven't done much research on that. All I could do is sort of, from my experience of newspaper articles. I remember one article, a woman killed her husband. It was New Year time. She stabbed him to death, and she got 2 years in jail, and she was released after 14 months. A man who kills his wife is sentenced life. Women who kill children usually get house arrest. Men who kill children get lifetime sentences. That's just from reading newspaper articles and exploring it that way. Is there a bias in courts? Of course. Judges still like to protect women, whether they're a male judge or a female judge. It's important to protect women.
Yes, well, just a recent example. There's a woman right here in Calgary that strangled her daughter with a scarf, and she's walking around free right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
House arrest.
Yeah, and I think, I think religion is a big factor in that one too.
Religion. I don't understand that one.
Do believe that the woman who strangled her daughter was a Muslim. I don't think they're not claiming it as an honor killing, but there's I think there's racial politics surrounding that too. The reason why there's a light sentence on her.
Can't comment on that because I comment on what I'm familiar with, and I don't know if it was the fact that she was Muslim, but what I did notice in the newspaper, if she was found guilty of second-degree murder, the federal criminal code specified there's a certain minimum sentence, and the judge overruled the minimum sentence.
Yeah.
That I found interesting.
Yeah, me too. Are you familiar with the Carla Homolka Paul Bernardo case at all?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Again, from what I've encountered in media.
Yeah, what was your opinion on that? She's walking around scot-free as well.
Yes.
With children of her own, and
Yes.
married to an ex-convict who was convicted of murdering his wife.
Yes. Life goes on. I mean, in essence, they both paid for their crimes. Society is satisfied that they paid, and they just go on with their life. It's as simple as that. But in terms of, you know, Paul Bernard, well, he's in jail for the rest of his life, and that's not going to change.
Yeah.
So, is there a certain bias that we find in court cases? I think so.
And of course, I think it's obvious that you and me are definitely not crying for Paul Bernardo
No,
and his situation, but the outrage is that his accomplice is walking scot-free.
maybe not only his accomplice. From some of the understanding of the videos, um, she may have been his motivator. He was a rapist, yes, but it sounds like it was her idea to do the killings.
Yes, yeah, I actually read a lot about that particular case, and I agree with that. She was definitely encouraging him. She wasn't the battered wife, the battered spouse that was being controlled, like she was leading people to believe, and that's what really trips me. Like, what the fuck? How could so many people just swallow that bullshit? Oh, you know, he hit me, and now he made me this way. It's all his fault.
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding of it, she presented her sister as a gift to him.
Yeah, it was a Christmas gift, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they raped her right on Christmas Eve, I believe.
And killed her.
Yes, and it was Carla who was actually trained to administer that form of chloroform. I believe it was actually halcyon they used.
Okay, not familiar with that. But,
Yeah, but it was basically tranquilizers that they used on animals.
Okay.
She was trained on how to use this stuff, and she should have known that she was using way too much, and I think she killed her sister intentionally, because she's a crazy bitch, and not only did she offer her own sister to this sick fuck, she was also jealous of him because he was attracted to her, and
Yes.
and was the younger version of her.
Yes.
And I think that was the motivator in the killings with the other girls. There's an incident where Paul leaves. I think he left her with Leslie Mahaffey, and she was tied up, and he left her with a mallet. He goes to the video store, comes back, and she's dead. So it was, and it was brought up in the trial by Paul Bernardo's lawyer that she had marks on her lower back, which looked like it could have been made by a woman's knee, Carla. It was by pressing her knee into her back while hitting her with the mallet in the head.
Well, there you go, eh?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but she's a woman; she could get away with it. It's as simple as that. And that seems to be, as I said, it's a world where we protect females, and by doing that, she's protected. Women are seen more as docile than they are as perpetrators. So, so that's what happens. So there definitely is a bias that men encounter. It's just unfortunate that by doing that, not only does it disadvantage men, but it also disadvantages women. But primarily, it disadvantages children. And
Now we're talking about the family courts now, right?
Just everything, whether it's
Everything.
domestic violence, whether it's the family court, whether it's the police, it's society. It's a matter of a very good example of this is if anyone goes online and looks at um, this title, Women's Shelters Save Men's Lives. And what these studies have shown is in areas where there were no women's shelters and then they put in women's shelters, spousal homicide against men decreased. And the conclusion is it decreased because when women were provided with an option, they could kill the guy or go into the women's shelter. So women went into the women's shelter. So I present the opposite side of the coin and say, well, if that's the case, then men's shelters would save women's lives because at the present time, men don't have any options. They have to stay and face the situation. If they were provided with an option like what's available in men's shelter, then they would be able to take time out, ground themselves, and figure out what the heck they were going to do.
Now, I've brought up the issue of men's shelters, and people have countered to me that women's shelters take in men and don't turn them away. Have you found that to be true?
No. The only thing that women's shelters do for men is they take men as perpetrators. They don't supply shelter services. They just provide abuse programs. So men are not getting the support. They're just getting programs to change them from abusers into non-abusers. That's all. They're not prepared. They're not funded to provide any shelters for men.
Well, Earl, I'd like to quickly wrap this up.
Okay.
Would you like to talk about your website before we sign off?
Well, the website itself is probably something that I put together as an educational basis. I want to share information. I want people to go up there and learn, read, question. And again, you go up there, and certainly it's there's no bashing. I don't like bashing. There's no bashing. So if anyone wants to go to our website, www.familyofmen.com, please visit and certainly provide what you have as an opinion. I'm open to that. And besides that, Pat, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you for finally talking to me again.
Couldn't find you.
Yeah, I guess we were both hard to find, eh?
There you go. Here we are in Calgary. The only way we communicate is with Skype.
Well, you got my number and I got yours, so.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Let's
did talk about those Thursday rib nights.
Yeah, well, that's going to be coming to an end because the house is sold and I'm going to be moving.
Oh no.
Didn't you know about that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. 2 articles in the National Post about the men's shelter being closed, and that's the end of it.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Yeah. What can I say?